Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about a very charming little story, The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. So I know we are a little bit past Halloween now, but I was reading this before Halloween. It's definitely an appropriate spooky season kind of book. So this is my second read of The Graveyard Book. I first read it when I was an undergrad, and I've read a couple other Neil Gaiman books. I read Coraline and The Ocean at the End of the Lane. But this one is a real standout. This book feels very special. So when this book came out, I think it was 2008, it came out in America and the UK at the same time, and it won both of their major children's literature awards. That was the first time that had ever happened, so critically acclaimed right out of the gate. And I can definitely understand why there is a kind of magic to this book that really pulls you in. So The Graveyard Book is a kind of play on The Jungle Book, a child being raised by beings besides humans. So in The Jungle Book, he's raised in the jungle. In The Graveyard Book, our main character is raised in a graveyard by ghosts and other supernatural beings. Our main character, whose name is Nobody Owens, that's the name he's given when he arrives in the graveyard. Owens is the name of his adoptive ghost parents. And he goes by Bod. I always feel a little confused by that because Nobody sounds like it should be Bud as a shortening, but people mistake him for Bob a lot, so I think it's Bod. Maybe it sounds more like Nobody in like a English accent, because this does seem to be British. But yeah, the opening chapter, we see this baby's whole family being murdered and him escaping and ending up in the graveyard, where he is adopted into the ways and the world of the graveyard. But the mystery of the man Jack, who is the man who killed his family, still looms. That man is still out there looking for him, so the outside world is a very dangerous place for Bod. But he has his ghost parents, the Owenses, and he has Silas, his guardian, who is not a ghost, but we will get to that. Yeah, we see Bod sort of learning about his little world in the graveyard and the world outside of that, and there's a whole cast of ghosts who live in this graveyard. It's like a little neighborhood, and we see him interacting with all of these different characters, and there's a lot of fun in that. So as far as like the genre of this book, I mean, it won these children's book awards. I've also seen it defined as a young adult book. So it's a little unclear what the ideal audience for The Graveyard Book is. Bod is a child for most of it. It's really not till the very end that we see him as a teenager at all. And something about how, each chapter feels like a very contained little episode, and they're like sort of neat puzzle pieces that kind of culminate at the end. Feels like a children's book to me. But there are horror fantasy elements, and there's some fairly gruesome depictions of violence in this book. And thematically, I think there's a lot of depth to it that makes more sense for a more teenage audience. But really, you know, no matter where you think it falls, this is a great example of what writing for young people can be, and that it doesn't underestimate them as readers, and it can be sort of fun and whimsical, and also, you know, give them a lot of seriousness and depth. So let's talk about Bod's guardian, Silas. So nowhere in this book does it explicitly say like what Silas is, but it's pretty heavily implied. He is neither dead nor alive. He doesn't come out during the day. He doesn't have a reflection. He's very old and seems to hint that he did a lot of terrible things in his past and is kind of reformed. So it appears that Silas is a vampire. But we see everything through Bod's perspective, and Bod has been raised in this world and doesn't really question the elements of it too much. It's very much like a normal thing, all of the little Silas quirks. Yeah, the relationship between Bod and Silas, his kind of father figure here, is really central to the story. You know, there's a lot about this book that's kind of like dark and morbid. Obviously, it's the Graveyard Book, but there is this sweetness to it, and the relationship between Silas and Bod is definitely one of those elements that feels very heartwarming. You know, sort of a grouchy, unconventional father figure is always fun. So he's really Bod's protector, and he is also the one who's, you know, guiding Bod along the way to be able to be independent and be his own protector. So Silas is a great character. I think universally people who read this book are obsessed with Silas. So the villain of the story is the man Jack, and not just him, but his whole organization. So much in this book really remains very mysterious. We're not given all the answers in great detail, but we're sort of very slowly shown this organization of Jacks. And they have all these like clever names like Jack Nimble, Jack Dandy. Jack Frost is the main man Jack, the one who killed Bod's family. So they have these magical abilities. They seem to be doing some sort of witchcraft, and I don't think ever fully unravel what the man Jacks are all about. But they're very ancient, very powerful. They feel almost all-knowing. And they make for a really effectively scary villain in this. So a very notable part of this, I think the part that really draws you into the Graveyard Book initially, is the way Gaiman does the world building. Because he has this whole like ecosystem of the graveyard that he has to develop, what the community is, what are the rules of, you know, being dead, what other creatures exist. And it's really in letting us see and letting Bod see what like everyday life is in the graveyard that we get that really great world building, and that's where a lot of sort of the whimsy and the fun comes in. So it really is like a little neighborhood, and they have like town hall meetings, and it's like people gossip and all these things, but they're all ghosts. And it's like the little details that feel very light and fun, especially if you're, you know, the kind of kid who's already into Halloween kind of things. Like every time we meet a new ghost, Bod like inserts what's inscribed on their headstone. And there's some humor in Bod's perspective in general, because while he is so tuned into the graveyard and knows so much about the world within those grounds that people outside don't know, he knows very little about the outside world, and the questions he asks and things like that add a lot of humor to it, especially when he's very small at the beginning of the book. Yeah, there's a chapter where he tries to go to a school with, you know, normal living children. Bod is living, but he can exist kind of as the ghosts do. But he has like a totally different understanding of history and all of these things that makes all of the other kids and teachers just think he's kind of crazy. And then, you know, everything to do with death is handled pretty casually. Bod is surrounded by dead people all the time, and death is not something he necessarily fears. It's kind of a big part of his journey is sort of coming to learn that he really does need to go live his life before he ends up back in the graveyard permanently, because all the people there are frozen in time. But yeah, like, coffins get overturned and bones fall out, and Bod's like picking them up and trying to get them all sorted back and things like that. It's just handed to us very casually and lightly, and the tone of this book is very interesting because of that. So like I said, Bod, he is given the freedom of the graveyard, which is how he can do some of the things that the dead do, even though he is not dead, like sort of making himself functionally invisible, like dream walking, like haunting people, basically, slipping through walls and things like that. So having those abilities is a big part of him being able to evade the man Jack while he grows up, and also, of course, the protection of Silas. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about my favorite chapter in this book, which is about the Danse Macabre. So this is a night that only happens like once every couple hundred years. Like, this is not a frequent holiday, but it's a night where the dead leave the graveyard and dance with the living. And the whole thing is just so mysterious and beautiful and so fleeting, because the dead, they remember that it happens, but they don't talk about it afterwards, and the living don't remember that it happened at all. And then the lady on the gray herself arrives. She seems to be kind of a Grim Reaper figure, and she plays, a pretty significant role in the story. When the baby first arrives to the graveyard, she is the one who sort of tells everybody in the graveyard to take the baby in, keep it here, protect it. So, but I don't know, that was such a magical scene in this book. And most of the other chapters we're kind of seeing Bod getting himself into messes and like various shenanigans, and this is a chapter that feels very serious, I guess. So let's talk about the ending of the book. So Bod, we see him age throughout the book. He's now a teenager, and things sort of finally come to a head with the man Jax. So he gets sort of lured out. Jack Frost, finally almost gets his hands on him. But Bod uses his knowledge of the graveyard, all of his skills, things that we've seen him learn in different chapters throughout the book, to come out alive. But then what's interesting about this is that his friend Scarlet, who I haven't talked about at all in this video, but she is a primary character in this book. She is like a normal living girl. When she sees Bod do all these things and like deal with the Jacks, she's kind of horrified. And Silas has to make her forget and send her away, which is pretty sad for Bod. But I think it really shows clearly for Bod, his guardian, his parents, that his life in the graveyard, him being so much among the dead, is incompatible with him being among the living. And he really needs to go live his life as a living person. He can't be in the graveyard anymore. So we really see that something has to change. And so ultimately, beating, Jack Frost and all of that doesn't seem to be the most important thing about this book at all. What's really important is Bod grows up and he has to go out in the world now because he's grown. And thus we get to the saddest ending ever, like heart-wrenchingly. It made me cry so much the first time I read it and the second time I read it. And it's so sad that it's like, yeah, maybe you should be a teenager when you're reading this and not a kid. But you know, we kind of see Bod gradually losing his abilities that he had as a child with the freedom of the graveyard, to the point where he starts to not even be able to see the ghosts anymore, the ghosts who have been his friends and companions his whole life. So it really is like a leaving home with no option to return kind of thing. There's a line in the book, it's something like, even if I were to come back, it wouldn't be home anymore, it would just be a place. So that's really sad, a really heavy theme, this loss of childhood when it's time to, you know, put away childish things. And that's something that a reader of any age can connect with, I'm sure. So we see his goodbye with Silas, which is really gut-wrenching, and then right at the gates, his ghost mother, Mistress Owens, sings him this lullaby, and it's really, really sad, but he has to go live his life now, and everybody in the graveyard has accepted that, and they understand that, and they want him to go live. Yeah, so, you know, we see Bod go from an infant to like 15 years old, and all of the changes with that. And we see him sort of say goodbye to his childhood, and he goes out and he lives his life with no regrets, you hope. So yeah, there's, you know, the horror fantasy elements. There's a lot of cool, interesting things about the world in this book, but the core of it is just so sweet. It just feels very, very wholesome and heartwarming. And I think it's said in the acknowledgments at the back that Gaiman kept writing this book because his daughter wanted more chapters, because she wanted to know what was going to happen next. Or at least that's what got him started with the story, and I feel like that makes a lot of sense. Like, this is a book written with a lot of love. Love for the characters and love for the children who will read this book. And who knows, maybe his daughter was kind of his ideal reader in his head. Yeah, I don't know, this is definitely a feel-good, maybe not because it's really sad, but, you know, satisfying, good, wholesome read. There is a lot of love in the story. So yeah, you know, there's some debate about who exactly this is written for. As an adult reading it, I thought it was great, so. Alright guys, that is all I have for this video, my last October spooky book. Yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.